ChatGPT has been huge for software because it seems to understand code and can generate it on the fly. Many people have been using this to create software from scratch, or more commonly using ChatGPT as an assistant to review code or come up with better ideas for their code. As someone who has never built a game and wanting to use ChatGPT for something practical, I decided I'm going to use ChatGPT to build a game from scratch. I saw a few people do it on YouTube, it inspired me to try it myself, and let me tell you, the results were pretty terrible. Now don't get me wrong, I did end up with a working game. It's pretty cool. Basically you're a tank, you run around trying to dodge bullets from this UFO that flies around the screen. You can shoot bullets of your own and the first one to get hit loses. Going into this, I only knew two things. One, I wanted to use C++ for this game. Since I've been using C++ a lot lately, I figured this would be a great way to get better at C++ and see a new use case for C++. And two, I wanted the game to be 2D. This is because it would be simpler, require less tools, and it just seemed like a good way to get into game development without overwhelming myself. I started with the bare basics, asking ChatGPT what are the best tools for game development in C++. After reviewing a few options, I decided to go with one of the easier ones, which was SFML. I compared this against some other options out there, but ultimately I figured out this was the best way to go. I learned the bare basics because I didn't want to go into this completely blind, and I had a feeling I would be doing some of the coding myself if ChatGPT wasn't able to figure out certain things. The first thing I did was generate a Makefile. This summarizes all of your different compile commands and allows you to easily rebuild your software. This would allow me to easily execute the game by saying make and /game. And then we would have our game show up over here. It died already. It's a pretty hard game. I had to make a few modifications, specifically if I installed SFML with Brew, so this was Mac friendly, but later on I did modify this to work on Windows as well. I wanted to start with the bare basics, so I created this game here which allows you to catch projectiles and it'll count how many you've caught. My original idea was a game where you couldn't allow anything to hit the ground and it would get progressively harder and harder until it was basically impossible. I actually got stuck pretty early on, and it wasn't a problem with ChatGPT or even the C++ code, it was actually permissions on Mac, because you have to give permissions to accept keyboard input for your application. The permissions worked the first time, but once I relaunched the game, I couldn't move my character. I started by updating the security for my Visual Studio Code and my game, and then from the command palette I did developer reload window and everything worked. ChatGPT was completely clueless when it came to this. When I explained the error, it basically said, oh, this was intended as a joke. Maybe this is some kind of joke I don't understand, but it said that the previous code did not include any code for handling keyboard input. Even though it clearly did because I was able to move my character around the first time. Tank Game V1 was a pretty good example of what I wanted this game to look like. You have a character you can move around and you don't want to get hit by any of the projectiles. This showed basically what the game is going to look like from the code perspective, so I started to understand where things go, how to work with different projectiles. This was inspired by the tank game from Wii, which is one of my favorite Wii games. For images, I used DALL, which allows you to use AI to generate images on the fly. So for example, here is something I just created a few minutes ago. Honestly, it's pretty sick. Not exactly what I was asking for, but pretty close. And I've done this for a lot of different game pieces, so it's quite useful. This was a cyborg Mona Lisa. With this, I was able to generate some tanks, and I ended up using this one, which is actually really awesome. And using my master design skills, I was able to remove the background and create this very beautiful image. But as long as people don't zoom in too close, then it's probably okay. Later on, I used this for grass and some walls, as well as the UFO, which you can see the one I chose being right here. For the walls, we wanted two things. First, that the bullets should not go through the wall, which I ended up adding after this moment, but also that you couldn't drive through the wall. So the collision worked pretty well on the walls, although later in the application some bugs were introduced and I'm not entirely sure when that happened. Basically a certain character combination would allow you to get stuck on the wall and you couldn't move unless you let go of your characters and then repress them. But I never did figure out the cause of that bug, but it's not that big of a deal. Probably something stupid I just didn't notice. Now the decision to not create a tank for the enemy, but actually a flying saucer, came when, after a while of frustration with this game, I was thinking how to make it easier. And if you have a tank, you basically have to coordinate the rotation of that image and firing the projectiles from the same direction as the orientation of that image. Whereas a flying saucer, it's much easier because it's a circle. In theory, it could fire 360 degrees. It can move 360 degrees. You don't have to worry about any collisions because in theory, it could just fly over these walls. So it made the game design a lot easier. If you wanted the enemy to be a tank, one way you could do it is to basically have the base of the tank and then the cannon of the tank, have the cannon always rotate to follow the character, you playing the other tank. So then you could basically coordinate the movement of the cannon and the actual direction the tank is driving separately, as long as those are linked together so they're always moving on the map together. Because after struggling with this game for so long, I was unwilling to put more of my time into playing games with ChatGPT. Overall, this was a pretty exciting endeavor. Given enough time, I probably would have taken a good look at the code base and restructured it, so maybe create a class for the enemy, a class for the character, or create a general function for collisions so that I don't have repeating code. And that could make my main code significantly smaller and significantly easier to understand, which then may have allowed me to ask ChatGPT more specific questions and better questions to get answers that I want. You know, asking questions about 500 lines of just spaghetti code versus asking about 30 lines of some function, it just makes the world of a difference. So that would have been my next step. But at this point, I was so deep into this spaghetti code and redoing everything from scratch was a little too much to ask of myself at the time because I really wanted to get this video planned and out. So once I had a fairly working product, I was like, yeah, this is good. Let's just not touch it. And, you know, let's just ignore those bugs, pretend they don't exist. Is this going to be the next game to take over the world? Probably not. I don't think so. Maybe V2 of this game, but we still got a while to go for that. I actually ended up studying some SFML myself and building another thing from scratch, understanding all the different components and how everything works. So this, looking back, I made it way too complicated trying to do this from scratch. I could have spent a few hours just studying and then used ChatGPT to my advantage. Let me know your experience. What do you think I should try next? And how do you suggest I improve my game development experience? Definitely would appreciate a comment. Drop it down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out. Also, if you're interested in other AI tools, I have another one which will help you write code within your editor. So definitely check that out as well.